rise and say my prayer. Little piece of bread to my mouth, little tea to wash it out. It's my daily tribulation, even though I'm a working man. I work so hard to make ends meet, so yeah, with one suit and one shoe to my feet. Days are getting so hard, yeah, but I got to keep on pushing on this 9 to 5, working to stay alive. On my 9 to 5, working till sun goes down. As the sun sets in the west, I pack my things and head on home, thinking about tomorrow's journey as I try these streets alone. It's my daily tribulation, oh yeah, searching for liberation, yeah. Got to step out of Babylon, take a step to Mount Zion. Days are getting so hard, yeah, but I got to keep on pushing on this 9 to 5, working to stay alive. Oh, on this 9 to 5, yeah, working till sun goes down, sun goes down. Oh, days are getting so hard, yeah, but I got to keep on pushing on this 9 to 5, working to stay alive. Oh, on this 9 to 5, working till sun goes down, sun goes down, sun goes. On this 9 to 5, yeah, working to stay alive. Oh, on this 9 to 5, yeah, working till sun goes down. Oh Lord, got to keep working, got to keep working.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. You're watching the show on YouTube or you're checking the live stream on Facebook Live. We thank you. If you like this kind of conversation, be a subscriber to our channel. It's the Insight News or Al McFarlane channel, and follow us on Facebook. I'm pleased today to have a conversation with Mariah Levison. She's director at Minnesota State Office for Collaboration and Dispute Resolution. The Office of Collaboration and Dispute Resolution assists state and local government in designing and delivering meaningful public engagement. The state of Minnesota 2016 Civic Engagement Plan defines meaningful public engagement as the intentional effort of government to facilitate meaningful dialogue with all members of the public in its work and the development of policy. Meaningful engagement means that relationships and conversations are reciprocal, authentic, intentional, and they create opportunities for all communities to participate in the process. So the public's increased interest in participating in public decision-making creates tremendous opportunities for better public policy and a stronger democracy. To realize those opportunities, both state and local government need to create new and innovative tools to partner with the public. Therefore, the creation of the Office of Collaboration and Dispute Resolution, they call it OCDR, and that organization uses collaborative processes and the science of human relations to help government and stakeholders improve relationships, build trust, and develop wise and durable solutions to sometimes seemingly intractable issues and problems. Difficult public policy issues are complex, and the public does and should have differing ideas on how to solve them. Troubles arise when we lose the belief that we have shared values, and we lose the trust and relationships necessary to bridge these divides. So conflict resolution in itself isn't a problem, but dealing with conflict effectively is key, actually, to, is the answer, dealing with that. So we're going to talk about that. I'm pleased to have Mariah Levison to go into more about what the work of the state is in the area. Mariah, good afternoon. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And so I've sort of read the bio, interesting as I read it and share it, but you can delve more into what this means for building a healthy democracy and the kind of community that and society that we really want to have. What do you think? Sounds
good. So the office, which we call OCDR, has a very long, kind of cumbersome name. It has been around, it's had two versions of the office. So it first started in the 80s and was around until about the early 2000s, and then it sort of went away and it came back. This time it was created in statute the second time in about 2013. And so now it's been around for another handful of years. It's a small office. There's just two of us in the office, but it's this time around, it's an important time to have these services available. So we have a broad mission in spite of our small size, but we're able to accomplish quite a bit through partnerships that we have with local government associations, with the state agencies that we work with, academia and community partners. So as you said, we work to build consensus on contentious public issues. That's one thing that we do. So we'll, at the request of the governor's office or state agency commissioners, our local government leaders, will come in to work on a particular issue and help bring folks together and see if we can find a path forward. Most of the issues that we work on are not the kind of thing that you can say, oh, this is resolved, it'll never be challenging again. So we work on things like police community relations, like what art should be at the Capitol, like relations between tribal nations and state government. So these aren't the kind of things that we say, oh, it's resolved and now, everything is, tied up in a neat bow. These are the kinds of things where we're working to help reestablish trust and relationships and communication so that folks can continue to work on things. It'll be challenging for a while.
How do you come to this work, Mariah? What's brought you to the opportunity, and what was the work like before you got there, and how are you putting your own personal imprint on the mission and the vision?
So my background is, I knew for quite a long time that I wanted to work in this area. I think for me, it's really meaningful. It's really rewarding and compelling work. In those moments when folks come together who are seeing things really differently, and suddenly there are these moments where they see where the other person is coming from and they understand in a different way. Doesn't mean they necessarily agree on, what the solution should be or the direction, but suddenly they're realizing this person isn't up to all the bad stuff I thought that they were up to. They have a perspective and they have a background. Those are really powerful moments to me. So I knew I wanted to do this work for a long time. And I worked at nonprofit dispute resolution centers in Chicago and New York before I moved to Minneapolis. My husband brought me here. I was not very excited about it, and now I love it. I love working here, and kind of how engaged folks are in both community and government here is one reason that I love it. So when I started working here, though, after having been in Chicago and New York, there were not as many opportunities to do this work here as I had hoped. And so I started convening a group of folks to talk about how can we do more in this area in Minnesota. Minnesota is a leader in so many areas, and I thought, how can we do more of this kind of work? And folks started talking, and a number of kind of stars aligned, and the legislature reinstated funding for this office and again created it in statute. And since I was one of those original people who had folks doing some thinking on this, the commissioner of the state agency where we first were, we've since moved, asked me to come on and run the office. So I've run it since it's been around for this second time. So for better or worse, it has shaped my vision, I think.
Mm-hmm. And so describe the vision again. You've said it and I've spoken it, I think, but just to hear it again, as you sort of put on your armor every day to go and challenge, injustice in the world. What is the mission that's guiding you breath by breath and step by step in this work?
Well, it just struck me that you used the word armor, because I think what I'm counseling leaders, state and local government, community leaders all the time to do is to take that armor off and to be really real and be really vulnerable. And I use lots of different sort of technical processes and techniques and trainings, but in a lot of ways, I think the heart of the work is helping people to be really open-hearted with each other. And that's where those opportunities are for folks to, again, better understand each other, bridge differences and find new ways to work together. So that's a piece of it. I'm hugely influenced by the fact that, well, again, these difficult issues don't get resolved once and for all in some permanent way, but I see in my work every day that there are opportunities for people who saw things really differently to come to see them in a different way and to make some progress. And so that's a huge driver for me, is trying to build government's capacity, and to some degree citizens, but we're pretty focused on government's capacity to take on these difficult topics and to do it in a way that builds bridges and finds, as we say, wise and durable solutions.
And so I appreciate that you responded to my choice of words. Thank you. How would you describe what has been the perceived standard of operation in government that your idea and your department seek to address? I mean, you obviously are created in response to a set of conditions, attitudes, policies, and practices. So describe what was, and let's use that as a way to contextualize the change that you think that you can bring to strengthen, enhance, and improve how governments work. Is that a fair question?
Sure.
Okay.
So one of the ways that we do that is that we both do processes ourselves around public engagement, around contentious issues, and then we also try to build the state's capacity to engage in more meaningful ways. So I feel really honored to work with our governor and lieutenant governor who really prioritize public engagement. And so the state has been doing thinking, starting under the last administration with Governor Dayton too, but thinking a lot about how we can do a better job in this area. There's not a whole lot of sort of a centralized infrastructure in the state to help with better public engagement. And so that is one of the things that my office does. So we provide training to state employees on how to provide more meaningful public engagement. We have resources on our website. We help to convene a group of public engagement practitioners. And then we'll get calls from state leaders, local government too, saying, there's a really contentious issue with folks on different sides of things. Can you help us think through a good way to bring people together? And again, a lot of the ways that we're helping to design things are to shift. One of the models of public engagement in state government is to have a bunch of impassive people sitting at the front of a room listening while people get their 3 minutes with the microphone. And while there is a place for that, I don't think that is often the most effective way to do public engagement. When we give folks a microphone and we give them 3 minutes, we're asking them to demand something. They only have 3 minutes. They can't do anything but demand something. We're not asking them to think through it in a complex and nuanced way and thinking about the needs of everyone involved. And so I don't think the state leaders get great information that way. And I don't think it's very satisfying to the community to get 3 minutes to say something that, you must care a lot about to turn out, on an evening on your own personal time. And so thinking about what are different
model, a practice of confrontation or confrontational model?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Would you call that model, that process, confrontational?
I don't think I would go so far as to call it confrontational. I think the intention behind it is good. It's to give everybody a turn to say their piece. But I think it sets us up unintentionally for conflict because it leads us each to demand things. And so what we often counsel state leaders to do is to do models that look something like having people sit down in tables together with somebody there to record the input, because we want government to hear from everybody and have that recorded, and to ask them questions about, not only what do you think is good or bad about these potential policies, but also having heard from your neighbors around you, what do you think the way forward might be? Because as government, we need to take all that feedback and input and perspectives and put it together. And so asking the public to do that along with us, don't just tell us the one thing that you want, but help us think through together. All your neighbors want something too, around this table. What might be the path forward? I think leads to better outcomes, and I think is more satisfying for the participants.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. My guest is Mariah Levison. She's program director for the conflict, that's not the right note here, for the Office of, Mariah, I've lost my notes here. Tell me.
I'm the director of the Office for Collaboration and Dispute Resolution at the Department of Administration. It's very long.
It's a mouthful. I turned my sheet over. That's why I'm making notes on the back of my notes here. But Mariah Levison, thank you for being here. And so to talk about some examples of how your work has played out in the recent year. This has been an amazing year, obviously, with I think of George Floyd in particular. I think of issues around the pipeline in northern Minnesota. I think of issues around health access, health disparities. Obviously, COVID-19 is affecting everybody, and there are issues of potential conflict or disagreement on how communities can be and are engaged in the solution side of that problem. Are there any stories that you can talk about how you've been able to bring your department into helping departments, agencies, governments, and communities approach and resolve problems?
I'm going to go a little bit further back in my example, but one that I think is relevant to this year, and then talk about this year a little bit. So some of the work that I'm proud of that I was involved in is that after Philando Castile was killed in Falcon Heights, the city asked for partners to come in and help them think through how to do things differently. Mm-hmm. So my office, along with folks at the Center for Integrative Leadership at the University of Minnesota, and Metropolitan State and other partners came in, and we helped the city design a task force process, as well as a series of community conversations. And so we had hundreds of people come in, and we started from a place of values, which is a place that I often start, talking about what are the values that we want the city to demonstrate. Mm-hmm. And so the conversation started out about, do we cancel the police contract or do we not? And that is common in my work, that we start out with sort of a this or that solution when it's a really complicated issue. And so one of the things that we strive to do is help folks think more deeply about what's important to them and what they want. So we worked on broadening the conversation to think about what kind of policing does the city want, and what kind of city government, what kind of community does the city and the community want to be. And so that resulted in a set of recommendations on policing and on inclusion that the city council adopted and then worked to implement. And again, not that things are all resolved, but that the city is using as a framework and working to implement. So again, hundreds of people coming in, sharing their thoughts about policing, inclusion, and the values for the city. So that's an example going a little bit further back. This year has been more challenging to do those kinds of processes because of COVID-19 and the difficulty in bringing people together. Mm-hmm. I have learned you can do that kind of work virtually. It is more challenging. I do think being face-to-face is helpful when we're talking about difficult issues, but we have been bringing folks together and figuring out how we do that in a virtual environment. But I think some of the places where we might have done that in the past, we've held off this year to say there's an awful lot going on and it's difficult to do this virtually, and thinking about things differently.
Mm-hmm. Thinking about your experience with the Philando Castile issue, have you been brought into the conversation, for example, by city or state agencies considering the question of police reform more broadly, or specifically the challenges of defunding the police? How would you enter a conversation like that if you haven't already? And if you have, talk about it.
Yeah, so I haven't been central to that conversation. Little side pieces here and there, but I have not been centrally involved in that conversation. But again, very similar to what I just said about Falcon Heights, I think the idea of, defund or don't defund the police is oversimplified, and there's really important ideas behind either side's position, right? So if you're saying defund the police, I think what you're saying is that we need more resources for prevention. We need more resources to deal with mental health. We need more resources to deal with education. And we need police who feel like they're a resource and a source of safety to our full community, among many other things. And if you're saying, I don't want to defund the police, you're saying there are real public safety issues in my community, and I want to feel safe, and I feel like the police are a part of that. So when we unpack those things, and when we unpack who are saying those things, then instead of feeling like you're on the other side of this huge divide, and how could you think that? And that's a crazy idea. Either way, we can start to understand, oh, that makes sense to me. You want to feel safe, and I want to feel safe on both sides. And then we find a lot of solutions that everybody can agree upon and find a path forward.
Same question in the area of health disparities. Have you had any practical negotiations dealing with the question of the disparities in health outcomes and or specifically around COVID-19? Does your work apply there in some way? What experiences are you having so far?
Yeah, that's another one I wouldn't say that I worked directly on. COVID-19, we would hope might be something that would bring us together. And it sort of appears to be another thing that has given us another thing to get into our camps about. Although I, as somebody in my field and a practitioner, I get some interesting information about how there's more common ground out there on a lot of these issues than we think, but at sort of the level of political discourse, we hear more division than might really exist for individuals. So I think that's the case with COVID-19. When it comes to health, the disparities and health outcomes and all kinds of outcomes in Minnesota, those are very complex issues that the state is working on at a wide variety of angles. I think the place where my office might come into play in something like that, again, is building that capacity around public engagement, making sure that there's a really wide variety of folks at the table who are thinking through solutions, whose voices are heard, and who we have good processes to make sure that we're learning from folks who have on the ground lived experience, as well as some of the data and the numbers that we have on the state side.
So it brings me back to the original question. I think, Mariah, the question was describe sort of the lay of the land in state government, in county government. How does the process work that you have been created to address? How would you describe the functioning of departments of the government or of the county or the city, and where and why was there a need to bring a different strategy? Now, I'm raising the question because I have my own ideas, and they're pretty clear on what problems have been, and the ideas I have are found based on my lived experience as a Black man, as a Black business owner, as a voter, as a parent and grandparent, my overall and ongoing interaction with the society and the institutions that make society move. Some very positive, some very negative, but we can, you kind of know the standard critique of institutional power relative to the experience of Black people or people of color or women or GLBT communities, people that have been marginalized. And so how would you describe again how governments handled the business of government before the opportunity to bring a different look at things came into play?
Well, that's a big question, I think. And I love working for government. I love that every day I get to go to work, and what my job is about trying to ensure that more people in our state thrive, have more opportunity, more justice, more dignity, more equality, all those things. And so I'm proud to work in government. And at the same time, I recognize that government, like the private sector, makes lots of mistakes and has lots of challenges. I think most of those come from, what we don't know. Mm-hmm. And so I think a big piece of that is bringing more folks into the conversation, into the table, and to honoring different perspectives. And I think the state is bureaucratic, right? The nature of large entities. And so, sometimes what I hear from folks within government that I'm working with is sort of like, we have the data on this. If we go out and talk to people, what they say might not be factually right. It might sway the conversation. It might be sort of the wrong information. And the paradigm shift that I encourage them to think about is that lived experience is a really valid kind of data. It's a different kind of data. The data that we have about numbers, who has access to water, what outcomes are, that's important data. But people's lived experience is important data, and it has to inform our decision making. I also, another thing that I work on is I think there's folks in state government can be risk averse because we can never make everybody happy, right? And we get beat up a little bit in the media or at the legislature, things like that. And so folks become a little bit risk adverse, I think. And so I encourage folks to take on those hard conversations. So that's a piece of, not business as usual, maybe, that I'm encouraging state and local government leaders to say, let's go out there and have these hard conversations, in spite of the fact that they might be messy, but we can do this. We can bring people together who have different perspectives, and we can help them work with us to find the way forward so that we don't have to be doing that on our own. Is that getting at your question?
It gets us down the road. I'll keep drilling on here till I'm comfortable and you're comfortable as well. Thank you for taking on these questions. I think it's important, and I am so happy, number one, that your office exists and that you're doing the work you do. I have to also say that I am a fan of our governor and lieutenant governor. I think, and our former governor, Mark Dayton, but I think that the current Minnesota governor and lieutenant governor and administration are doing a marvelous job in declaring and acting on the declaration that equity is at the center of how they believe our state can move forward, and that they seem to be, from my point of view, intentional in infusing a value that is introspective, that is measurable, and that has accountability attached to it. When we examine, is the state doing all it can and should be doing to ensure that all the citizens of the state, the residents, have a fair and equal chance at living, sustainable quality lives. And I think that's in alignment with what's happening in Washington right now with the new administration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So I'm generally speaking from a point of view of being both excited, positive, elated at the possibilities. And I say that in a backdrop, against a backdrop of seeing consistent failure and resistance and almost intentional and willful denial of problems. Even though the data suggests the problems, the society has had the willingness to say, oh, that's a one-off, or that particular person and situation represented a individual's failure, but not look at systemic problems that deny opportunity to large segments of our population. So that's where I'm coming from in the question. And I believe there's power in what you are doing and saying to help institutions who have their own character and personality and things that make them what they are, and therefore they have built-in resistance. And I think you're creating a pathway to create methodic, responsiveness in government to the voice and aspirations of the citizens. Is that a fair assessment of how you see your work or not?
It is. And it is so rewarding to get to work for our governor and lieutenant governor, and all of the things that you said are true. And when I'm with them, you just feel how much they really believe that and how much they care. And so whenever I have the opportunity to get them to one of the things that I'm running, I always do, because they do the absolute best job creating that tone and that presence. And I think their intentionality there is making its way through the state. The state is a big place. I think all of their cabinet knows that this is a priority and is working towards it. And my piece of that is, or at least one piece of that is helping to give folks the skills and the tools to do some things that feel different and unfamiliar and maybe challenging. So again, making sure that they have the tools to have difficult conversations, to know that we can talk with folks and folks can have different perspectives and that can be okay and we can hear that. Another kind of paradigm piece that I push a lot is that when folks come to us and they seem angry, that's passion about an issue and that's what we want. As public servants, we want an engaged public. And when folks are coming to us in what might feel critical or attacking, that's actually positive energy there. That's folks caring enough to come out, to tell us what they want, to work with us. And so we just need to see that a little bit different so that it doesn't sort of trigger us and get us, frozen and nervous, so that we can say, wow, you really care a lot about this. Tell me more. Let me learn more from you. How can we work together? So part of what I see my office's job is doing is helping state leaders kind of understand some basics about human beings, understand some basics about humans relate to each other, and give them some tools and skills to do this work well, as our highest level of leadership is telling us to do.
In preparing for the interview, I pulled up an article you wrote. I didn't read it fully yet, but the proposition is one that intrigued me. And the question was, you wrote about health versus economic policy. I think that's what it was. And go through that if you would, because that's kind of what I've been getting at as well with you, Mariah. How do we juxtapose or figure out how we handle things that are equally important, equally valuable, but sometimes where we stand and how we benefit or how we are disadvantaged by the processes make us go into camps, into tribes that end up disserving our common interest in the long run and the effectiveness of society. So go through what that article, what the premise was for the article that you wrote, and what conclusions you drew out of that, and how does it apply to the conversation we're having right now?
Sure. So I think I was saddened when COVID was happening that it wasn't bringing us together in some of the ways that people might hope a crisis could bring us together. And so I worked with some partners to write an article about that and to help us see if there could be some different ways to think about the challenges that we were facing. And something that it probably one of the most central things to my worldview is that people are always doing something for a reason. Doesn't mean people aren't sometimes doing things that are harmful or hurtful or not productive, but when you kind of peel back the layers of the onion, people are doing something because they're looking to feel secure, they're looking to feel significant, they're looking to feel empowered. And so whatever the policy issue, whether it's how to manage COVID or some of the other ones that we've talked about, if you sort of peel back those layers, we can get to a way forward based on those needs that we all have, these kind of shared needs. And so when it comes to COVID, when we talk about masks and the state being open or closed, folks have very valid concerns on both sides, right? We want people to be healthy. We want to preserve life, on sort of the side of let's shut things down, let's wear masks, let's follow all the protocols. On the side of sort of we need things to be more open. People need to make money. They need to be able to pay their rent. They need to be able to do the things that are important to them. And so all of those are important things. And I think we too easily fall into false dichotomies. And when we recognize that underneath those position statements are a bunch of needs that most people would agree to, that's where we can find the path forward. And so I was hoping with that article, and I think the one that you're looking at is probably one that I wrote in partnership with the League of Minnesota Cities and the Association of Minnesota Counties, which also do this work in partnership with my office, encouraging folks to think about where are those shared needs, where are those shared values, and that any issue where there's contention, that's the way to find a path forward.
Mm-hmm. And so how does that apply to, I'll stretch here, the people that we saw in protest on January 6th at the Capitol? How would you use the principles to examine this moment of conflict? And we've all been sort of describing the conflict as existential. It really gets at the heart of who we are and what we are as a nation And as human beings, I think, how do you bring principles of conflict resolution to these deep divides?
Yeah. So I think to the extent that I'm good at my job, I'm good at it because it is easier for me than for some people to see what those underlying needs might be for folks. Mm. And while not all actions are okay, and we need to name that, simultaneously, I think we can say, what do we think is going on with those folks? And certainly one of the things that's going on is that our media environment is different than it's ever been before. And it is really hard for folks to know what to trust. I was just on it was a staff level call at work, but folks are really debating whether they felt safe about taking the vaccine or not. Mm-hmm. And really thoughtful, reflective folks were struggling with, there's all this different information out there about that. And so folks get information that is not accurate, and they're manipulated by that. And so one thing that I understand about those folks is that they were being told, and they were being told by the President of the United States, things that weren't true. So we need to think about that. We need to think about misunderstanding and information, and how can we make some changes to our information environment. Another thing that I think about with those folks is that, rightly or wrongly, and oftentimes folks have misperceptions of reality, but from my perspective, we still need to understand what their perception is in order to make some progress. So their perception might be that they are no longer being valued or recognized, or that their way of life is under threat or going away. Now, whether that's true or not is a different issue, but that's some of what they're feeling. And if we don't start by recognizing what it is that they're feeling and thinking, I don't think we find the way to bring ourselves back to some shared truth and some shared information, into the shared reality that that we can work together to create, equity and equality and good outcomes, and that we do that by including everybody.
Mm-hmm. So from my point of view, again, as an African American, as a Black person, the core challenge has to be the elimination of what I call white supremacist thought, the idea of white supremacy, as it has revealed itself in the historic relationship between the enslaved and their descendants in our society, and the institutions created during the enslavement and ones that were created afterward that ended up supporting simply modifications and variations on theme, but all of which express themselves today in the broad list of disparities. I think now more than ever, we are learning to not blame the victims and to describe the failings of society as the responsibility of those that have been systemically denied opportunity and whose sense of self has been under attack for generations. But we're looking at examining the structures and the processes that yield and that predictably produce these difficult situations and predictable outcomes of disadvantage. And so as an arbitrator and negotiator, as a neutral voice, how do you see our society walking its way through becoming what it can become and what it must become in order to create a space that recognizes and supports the dignity of every member of the society, and do that in a way that doesn't require the disregard of the humanity of any member of society? Big question. What do you think?
Yeah, that is a big question. I think one of the positive things I see is that we're talking about things that we haven't talked about in the past, the kinds of things that you were just talking about. When we talk about the role of monuments, there's lots of monuments that represent things that maybe are things that we don't feel good about and proud about anymore. Those are things, we weren't talking about those hard things before. When we see, NFL players taking a knee, we're starting to talk about these things, and they cause a lot of they cause a lot of big feelings for a lot of people, right? And so I think we're not going to find the way forward without having hard conversations. We need to talk about history. We need to talk about systemic injustice. And that makes people uncomfortable. And so part of what I see my office's role and my role is helping people recognize that this is good to have these hard conversations. We aren't gonna achieve the equitable outcomes that most people want without talking about hard stuff. And it's okay to talk about hard stuff. And so part of my work is to do trainings and provide resources about how to do that. Another piece of my work is actually to facilitate those kinds of processes and help people do that, and help people recognize that this is not an either or situation. This is a situation about all of us understanding what we all need, and recognizing that there are historical components there. So when we talk about what everybody needs, we need to recognize the history there and how people of color, women, immigrants, LGBTQ people have been left out, and how that history plays into finding a path forward, but that we can have those hard conversations. It's possible.
Great. Well, listen, Mariah Levison, I want to thank you so much for taking time to spend this moment with me. I have the paper. I'm going to read your title the right way this time. Mariah Levison, Director of Minnesota State Office for Collaboration and Dispute Resolution. Thank you so much for this conversation. Keep up the good work. You're welcome to come back at any time. I think you are exactly right. The more we talk about it, the better. And the talking about it with intention creates vocabularies that allow us to define new and better realities, create new narratives that, I tell people, what if we talk about winning differently? What if we can create a system where winning doesn't require that someone lose? Mm-hmm. Everybody just wins, right? Yep. And so I think it's an idea that we have to start with and keep figuring out how to make that so. And I think you are exactly right. It begins with talking about it and having the courage and the confidence in ourselves and in our society and in humanity that will let us have these difficult conversations and to examine anything and everything with the right motive in the examination. That's what I think. So thank you so very much. And I will invite you back in the future to have more conversations. Any parting thoughts or words you want to share with our audience?
I think that kind of win-win, we are kind of nerdy word for that is integrative problem solving. We can integrate the solutions of everybody, and those are where we get those wise and durable solutions. And I know it doesn't seem like it these days, but in my daily work, I see that it's possible. So I hope to impart some hope that I think we can do that. And thank you so much for having me and for your really good questions. I really enjoyed the conversation.
I enjoyed it as well. Thank you. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. Thanks to my guest, Mariah Levison, Director of the Office of Collaboration and Dispute Resolution at the state of Minnesota. If you like this conversation, subscribe to our channel here at YouTube, or like us and share this on your social media, Facebook and Twitter. We do this every day, 5 days a week. We want you to be with us, and we thank you for being with us. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you later. Bye.